we're going to try to get 23 and 24 today. We're trying to hit a couple of chapters a week so we can finish up by the last Sunday of January. And Paul is kind of being passed around at this point from one leader to another just to be held accountable for what he's done wrong, which he hasn't done anything wrong except share the gospel. And it really gets into the core of that it seems as though everyone just is losing their mind over the teaching of Jesus resurrecting from the dead. That's what this all boils down to. He mentions that here a couple of times. So it's interesting to see the conversations that take place. He's been taken into custody. Were you here last week? I don't think you were here. He was chained up. Basically, he's taken into custody, and they chained him, and he was about to be scourged the way Jesus was scourged. I mean, they were going to beat him bad for what he's done. But then he revealed that he was a Roman, which he was. He's a Jew and a Roman. And everybody really got on high alert, because if a Roman ever did anything of that nature to another Roman, then the person that did that would be done the same thing to. You didn't do that. Romans didn't do this to each other. So he revealed that he was a Roman. They ended up setting him free, essentially, and bringing him before a council to plead his case, essentially. And that's where we open up in chapter 23. And chapter 23 starts off, says, and Paul, as he's been brought before this council, earnestly beholding the council, said, Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. And the high priest Ananias, and that's all he said, is I have lived a good life, my conscience is clear, and I have done what I'm supposed to up to this point. And that made the high priest so mad, he commanded him to be punched in the mouth, basically. It says that the high priest Ananias commanded them that stood by to smite him on the mouth. And Paul said unto him, God shall smite thee, thou whited wall. For sittest thou to judge me after the law, and commandest me to be smitten contrary to the law? He's kind of calling them out, saying, you guys are the ones out of line here, not me. What does that phrase whited wall refer to? Does yours say something different?
Whitewashed.
Whitewashed. What does that even mean?
Maybe Roman.
Do what?
Romans were more like, I don't know.
Now he's calling the Jewish high priest a whitewashed or whited wall.
You whitewash things to clean them, or to take the
Make them
appear
look
clean.
To make them appear clean, at least on the outside. Jesus brought this up back in Matthew 23. I was doing a little bit of study on that. And he actually starts in verse 25, but specifically in verse 27 of chapter 23 of Matthew. Jesus was addressing this same crowd when he was on earth. He said, Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye make clean the outside of the cup and of the platter, but within they are full of extortion and excess, or nasty, basically. But he was saying that their lives were like someone who just had, y'all don't know about this, but back in early days, people would put dishes on shelves to just be on display to look pretty. And people would wipe the outside of them because that's what everybody saw, but didn't necessarily clean the inside of the dishes because they were never used. And he was saying they were dirty dishes on the inside, but they had polished themselves on the outside, so they were very hypocritical, basically is what he's saying. And it says, But you are full of extortion and excess. Thou blind Pharisee, cleanse first that which is within the cup and platter, that the outside of them may be clean also. And then here's the phrase that ties into, I think, more directly this verse. It says, Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like unto whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outward, but are within full of dead men's bones, and are of all uncleanness. So that's the picture that Paul is calling the high priest of the Jewish culture. The main is the equivalent to the Pope, to the Catholics, is how this guy was. And he called him filthy, dirty, nasty on the inside, and he just looked good on the outside for everybody to think he was a good person, basically. So that's what Paul said to the high priest. And they that stood by, verse 4 says, revilest thou God's high priest? Then Paul said, I wist not, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written, thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of thy people. Basically what that means is, I wish he wasn't, because I'd really tell him what I think about it. Pretty much is what he was getting at. But because of the custom and because God's word says to not speak against leaders, and we're even to apply that in a presidential situation or any leader in government, we're really to reverence the position. It's hard sometimes to reverence the position if you don't honor the person or respect the person. But we do need to reverence at least the position. And that's what Paul was doing here. He says, but when Paul perceived, here's where he kind of found an angle here to he wasn't really stirring up trouble, but he was bringing his case to the surface a little bit. He says, but when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Of the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am called in question. So that's the whole reason they keep doing this to him. Because he keeps claiming that Jesus rose from the dead. And that he himself, several occasions, he talks about that encounter on the road to Damascus. And that's what everybody's all been up in there. And still today, a lot of people are okay with you talking about God. But as soon as you start talking about Jesus, that's where the real contention kind of sometimes breaks in. And you'll see that a lot, even in crisis, but didn't hear a lot about Jesus. And people distinguish the two separately for some reason, even though Jesus is God. And this is kind of the same thing. The Pharisees and the Sadducees were all about God, but they would have nothing to do with Jesus. And that's Paul's whole mission here, is to try to get the message of the gospel across. And the whole differentiating point of Jesus versus anybody else in human history is he rose from the dead. No one else ever did that. That's been proven. Some claims have been made to other various religions, but there's none been proven the way Jesus has been proven. And when he had said so, there arose a dissension between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the multitude was divided. Here's where the Bible tells us the difference in Sadducees and Pharisees. Y'all ever known the difference in the two? Who are these people?
Sadducees.
They're sad, you see. Yeah. And then some of them are fair. We'll talk about why. You've ever heard of the difference, or even know the difference? So they're all Jewish kind of priests, if you will, or religious leaders. But there's a group called the Sadducees and the group called the Pharisees. Here's the difference. Verse 8 says, for the Sadducees say there is no resurrection, neither angel nor spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. Really, it's in that one verse right there, verse 8. So I saw a TikTok that filled me up, fired me up. It's a pastor, and he's teaching in his church and now putting out there online for everybody to mull over, that when you die, you cease to exist. He's like, when you die, you don't go to heaven, you don't go to hell, you don't go to purgatory, you cease to exist until a future point at which God decides to bring you back into existence. That's basically what the Sadducees believed. That when you died, you just died. And you went into soul sleep, as a lot of them describe it, where you're unaware, you're unconscious, you basically cease to exist until at which point, I guess, but see, they didn't believe in any resurrection. So I guess they just believed you died, and that was it. They believed in zero resurrection. The Pharisees...
So that's Old Testament teaching about that.
Yeah. Well, but some of the Old Testament even David said when his first child with Bathsheba died, he said, he cannot come to me, but I will go to him. Which implies that David believed in an afterlife and that he would go to be where his son was. That's why we base on biblical account that children who die are automatically going to heaven, because they're not to that knowledge of accountability and all that. So there's several passages that you can dig through where David even said, "Thou shalt not leave my soul in hell." He believed in a soul, meaning Sheol, the Old Testament place of death, basically. So
But
the Old
when
Testament,
Christ returns, the early saints will rise first.
right.
So-
So here's the way I understand the full context of the Bible, because Peter in first or second, I can't remember where, he talks about, because he brought this up too. He was like, when Jesus died, he was dead and he ceased to exist. He didn't go anywhere. He uses this. He even said to Mary, "Touch me not, for I have not yet ascended to my Father." So Jesus didn't go to heaven when he died for 3 days. He was just in the ground, is what this preacher
It was
teaches.
sin, right? He took on the
He
sin.
took on the sin of the world. But Peter states that during that time he went and ministered to the saints in prison. And in Luke 16, Jesus teaches about Lazarus and the rich man, that they both died. One went to be comforted in Abraham's bosom. One went to hell. They could see each other. And the rich man said to Abraham, I guess it was Lazarus or Abraham, one of the two. He says, "Go and tell my 5 brothers so that they won't come to this place," which is an obvious account that there's an afterlife and there's awareness and there's pain, suffering, but there's also comfort, and the people are aware of these things after they die. So the whole idea of you're unaware isn't supported by biblical teaching. So the idea is when Jesus, because Jesus said to the Pharisees, a perverse and wicked generation seeketh after a sign, says, "I will give you no sign but the sign of Jonah." Whereas Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the whale. He actually used the word whale there. So shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. You tie all that together, and what I get the image of is there was a place, because he said to the thief, "Today," and this is another part of his video. He says, if you read it, it's totally different from the way this preacher puts it. This preacher says, Jesus said, I say unto you today, thou shalt be with me in paradise. But the way it reads, the comma in the sentence is before the word today. So it's, I say unto you, today thou shalt be with me in paradise, meaning today. And this preacher's like, he didn't mean that. The comma didn't exist in the original language. Therefore, he was just, which means you could take it either way. That he's preaching, he said, I say unto you today, I'm telling you right now, today, at some point in the future, you'll be with me in paradise, is the way this preacher's taking it. But this is a Sadducee type teaching. That when you die, you just cease to exist, and you don't go to heaven, you don't go to hell, you don't go anywhere except into the grave, and you're simply at the mercy of God moving forward. Whether he decides to do something with you or not, that's up to him. That's what the Sadducees believed, and that's why they were sad, you see. That's where that phrase comes from. They were sad, you see. But the Pharisees, they were fair about it because they believed in the resurrection. So they were fair, you see. So they're the Pharisees. I've always heard that said that way. But that's the difference in what they believed. One believed once you die, you're just dead. The other believed that angels existed, that your spirit existed, that there is an afterlife, and there is a resurrection. So that's what the Pharisees believed, and of course that's what the Bible teaches. So the Sadducees, I also understand it to be that the Sadducees only consider the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, to be valid. The Chosen even brings that out. That the Sadducees consider just the first 5 books of Moses to be the Word of God. All the rest of the Old Testament they don't even consider to be valid, nor the New Testament, obviously, at this point, because the New Testament didn't exist as being written.
That's why they try to follow all those laws.
That's why exactly why they try to follow all the laws. So, that was the big... Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go
So,
ahead.
he was here with both, so those two...
Both of them were in the same meeting area. They'd all come together to come up with as much ammunition against Paul as possible to try to have him put to death. So they had come together in this moment. And Ananias, the high priest, was of this Sadducee mindset. So he was a Sadducee as well. He was the high priest, but he was also of the Sadducean group. But the Pharisees were there also. And because they were all there, and none of them really, the two groups anyway, didn't agree on what we just talked about, it says that there arose a great cry, and the scribes that were of the Pharisees' part arose and strove, saying, "We find no evil in this man. But if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God." So he at least won over half the crowd, basically saying that all this stuff is true, and this is what I believe. I am a Pharisee, and he kind of won them over, and they kind of wanted to let him go at that point. But the Sadducees were all still bent out of shape about it because they didn't believe the same way. It says, "And when there arose a great dissension, the chief captain, fearing lest Paul should have been pulled in pieces of them," that they're literally tearing him apart, commanded the soldiers to go down and to take him by force from among them and to bring him to the castle. Now this is really cool. Jesus has already made himself known to Paul on the road to Damascus when he was Saul. And he addressed him as Saul. "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you? I'm Jesus." He tells this whole conversation. Here, Jesus comes to him again. And these are words in red. So we know these are the words of Christ. Verse 11 says, "And the night following, the Lord stood by him and said, Be of good cheer, Paul." Called him by Paul instead of Saul. I think that's neat. "For as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem," which we know how that went. Everybody lost their brain over there. "So must thou bear witness also at Rome." So Jesus declares, just like you went to Jerusalem, you are also going to go to Rome. Paul has said already in chapter 19, "I must also see Rome." We pointed that out last session, that at least through the Holy Spirit, or maybe just his own ambition, he was determined to go to Rome to speak to Caesar. I mean, he wanted to go straight to the top with this message of the gospel. Here Jesus is telling him, you will do this in Rome as well. So he's got a comforting assurance straight from Jesus Christ that he's going to end up in Rome. So that's going to help alleviate a lot of his fears and worries of being killed along the way, because until he gets to Rome, I would be under the assumption God's going to take care of me. And Jesus is going to at least carry me through and keep me alive until I'm able to get to that point to stand before Caesar and share this message with him as well. Interesting stuff. Y'all got any thoughts before we carry forward? Kind of neat stuff. So Jesus gives them that message. He says, be of good cheer. You're going to go to Rome. And when it was day, here's a conspiracy theory. This is like Days of Our Lives or something. It's like all this crazy stuff starts happening. It says, and when it was day, certain of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under a curse. That really means an oath. It's a negative oath towards themselves, because it says, we will not eat or drink until we've killed this man Paul. I mean, they're just that determined to get rid of it. And it's an oath, but it's called a curse in this passage. And they were more than 40 which had made this conspiracy. And they came to the chief priests and elders and said, we have bound ourselves under a great curse or oath, that we will eat nothing until we have slain Paul. Now therefore, and here's the conspiracy part, here's what they tried to plan. Now therefore, ye with the council signify to the chief captain, that he bring him down unto you tomorrow, as though you would inquire something more perfectly concerning him. Because they needed a reason why they're going to bring him back. I just tell them that you want to know more about this situation so you have a deeper understanding of what's going on. That's the story we'll go with. But in reality, when he comes near, we will be ready to kill him. So that was the plot. They're going to kill him, but they're going to make it look like he's just being brought back before the council so they can understand something a little bit better. Well,
And they believed, like Saul believed, they were cleansing out.
correct. They believed they were right.
They thought they were doing what God wanted them to do.
Right, because they thought, like Saul thought Jesus was a blasphemer, and all the Christians were as well. These people are saying the same thing about Paul now, that he's blaspheming. We see a lot of the details over here in chapter 24 when we get there. But evidently, Paul's nephew overhears the situation. It says, and when Paul's sister's son heard of their lying in wait, he went and entered into the castle and told Paul. And Paul called one of the centurions to him and said, bring this young man unto the chief captain, for he hath a certain thing to tell him. So he took him and brought him to the chief captain and said, Paul the prisoner called me unto him and prayed me to bring this young man to thee, who had something to say unto you. And the chief captain took him by the hand and went with him aside privately and said, what do you have to say? And he said, the Jews have agreed to desire thee that thou wouldst bring down Paul tomorrow to the council, as though they would inquire somewhat of him more perfectly. Do not thou yield unto them, for there lie in wait for him more than 40 men, which have bound themselves with an oath that they will neither eat nor drink until they have killed him. And now they are ready, looking for a promise from thee. So they're trying to pull this guy into the middle of it and just make all this happen. So the chief captain then let the young man depart and charged him, see that thou tell no man that you have shown me these things. And he called unto him. This is where Paul then is transferred to another person. So we've got Ananias, we've got the Sadducees trying to kill him, we've got the chief captain in charge dealing with all this. So the chief captain is Roman at this point. And now he's going to hand him off to somebody else. He's going to send him to a guy named Felix, who was the governor, I believe. And here's how he pulls it off. The chief captain called unto him 2 centurions and said, make ready 200 soldiers. So 200 soldiers he pulled together to go to Caesarea, and horsemen 70, which is 70, and spearmen 200, and at the 3rd hour of the night. I'm assuming that's 9 p.m. because 6 p.m. is the first point of the day for the Jews, and the 3rd hour would be 9 p.m. So they're doing this at nighttime. And provide them beasts that they may set on Paul and bring him safe unto Felix the governor. And he wrote a letter after this manner. So here's the contents of the letter. It says, Claudius Lysias. So this was the name of the guy. The chief captain was Lysias, as he's known as. Unto the most excellent governor Felix sendeth greeting. This man was taken of the Jews and should have been killed of them. Then came I with an army and rescued him, having understood that he was a Roman. And when I would have known the cause whereof they accused him, I brought him forth into their council, whom I perceived to be the accused of questions of their law, but to have nothing laid to his charge worthy of death or of bonds. And when it was told me how that the Jews laid wait for this man, I sent straightway to thee, and gave commandment to this accuser also to say before thee what they had against him. Farewell. So he's basically like, this is too much for me. They're going to kill him if I leave him here. I'll send them to you to see what you can do with it. And the soldiers, as was commanded, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. It's hard to say. And on the morrow they left the horsemen to go with him and return to the castle, who, when they came to Caesarea and delivered the epistle to the governor, presented Paul also before him. When the governor had read the letter and asked of what province he was, and when he understood that he was of Cilicia, which is Tarsus, where Paul's always held fast that that's where he's from, I will hear thee, he said, when thine accusers are also come. And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's judgment hall. So he has taken him into custody. He's holding him, but he's like, we're going to let these people come here, and we'll hear the story again. We'll see what happens. So after 5 days, it takes almost a whole week, Ananias the high priest descended with the elders and with the certain orator named Tertullus, who informed the governor against Paul. And when he was called forth, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, so here's the pitch that they give to the governor now. Seeing that by thee we enjoy great quietness, and that very worthy deeds are done unto this nation by thy providence, we accept it always and in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness. So he's buttering him up, basically, saying things are calm and cool, and we appreciate all you're doing for us, and all that. Notwithstanding that I not further be tedious unto thee. He's like, I'll get to the point here. I pray thee that thou wouldest hear us of the clemency a few words. So here are the accusations that the Sadducees and Ananias and all them are making against Paul. We have found this man, this is verse 5 of chapter 24, by the way. We have found this man a pestilent fellow and a mover of sedition among the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. Of course, Jesus was called a Nazarite, a Nazarene. That phrase, can anything good come from Nazareth? We keep hearing that in the Chosen over and over again. That was a saying of the Old Testament and into the New. Who also hath gone about to profane the temple, whom we took and would have judged according to our law. But Chief Captain Lysias came upon us with great violence, took him away out of our hands, commanding his accusers to come unto you, by examining of whom thyself mayest take knowledge of all these things whereof we accuse him. And the Jews also assented, saying these things were so. So that was the accusation, that he's blasphemed the temple, he's causing all kinds of trouble, he's a leader of some little sect of a town that nobody wants to have anything to do with, and he's basically just a rogue person. Of course, that's what they said about Jesus as well, the same as with John the Baptist. And the Jews have all come together saying the same things against him. So now it's Paul's turn. That was the accusation. Here comes the defense. Paul, after the governor had beckoned unto him to speak, answered, and his was his response. For as much as I know that thou hast been many years a judge unto this nation, I do the more cheerfully answer for myself, because that thou mayest understand that there are yet but 12 days since I went up to Jerusalem for the worship. And they neither found me in the temple disputing with any man, neither raising up any people, neither in the synagogues, nor in the city. Neither can they prove the things whereof they accuse me now. But this I confess unto you, that after the way which was called heresy, so worship I the God of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and in the prophets. That separates the Sadducees from the Pharisees, because he's saying he also believed the rest of the Old Testament, all the prophetical books, major minor prophet books, as we call them, and have hope toward God, which they themselves also allow, meaning the Pharisees, that there shall be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and unjust. So he brings that up again. Again, the Pharisees are completely okay with that. The Sadducees aren't. And herein do I exercise myself, to have always a conscience void of offense towards God and towards man. He said, I'm very careful to never offend people in any way, the best I can. Now after many years I came to bring alms to my nation and offerings, whereupon certain Jews from Asia found me purified in the temple, neither with multitude nor tumult. So he's basically saying, I've done what I should all this time. I followed the law. I've done everything I can to be a good Jew. And of course he's a Roman as well, who ought to have been here before thee and object if they had aught against me. So what he's saying is, all this time and all these years, it's not until now they come trying to bring all this stuff up to you. They should have been doing this a long time ago, because I've been doing this for a long time. So why they're bringing it up now is insuspect, basically, is what he's saying. Or else let these same here say that they have found evil doing in me while I stood before the council. Except it be for this one voice that I cry, stand among them. And here's the whole point again of why he's being persecuted. Touching the resurrection of the dead, I am called in question by you this day. Again, that's the whole reason all this stuff keeps happening to him, because he's preaching the resurrection of Jesus Christ and the resurrection of those who believe in Jesus Christ at a future point. And when Felix heard these things, having a more perfect knowledge of that way, he deferred them and said, when Lysias, the chief captain, shall come down, I will know the uttermost of your matter. He's saying, I'm going to have Lysias come and confirm all this as well. And he commanded the centurion to keep Paul and to let him have liberty, and that he should forbid none of his acquaintance to minister or come unto him. So he was held captive, but kind of had very loose reins to where he could kind of do what he wanted, considered to be a good person, a prisoner, if you will. His friends could come and visit with him if they wanted to. And we even see here, after certain days, when Felix came with his wife, Drusilla, kind of a neat name, which was a Jewess, he sent for Paul and heard him concerning the faith in Christ. So he even listened to the gospel pitch. But we see a little bit of scoundrel in him, I guess you could say, in the last few verses here as we get ready to finish out chapter 24. It says, and as he reasoned, so Paul's preaching to the governor and his wife. It says, and as he reasoned of righteousness, temperance, and judgment to come, Felix trembled and answered, go thy way for this time. When I have a convenient season, I will call for thee. Basically, he's like, okay, I hear you. This is interesting stuff. I'm going to kind of let you a little further loose on your reins, but stay in the area. When I have need for you, I need you to come back, and I'm going to call for you. He hoped also, this is kind of a little reflection of Felix's character, he hoped also that money should have been given him of Paul, that he might loose him. So I guess he was thinking, since I'm doing him a favor, maybe he'll decide to pay me enough money so I can just say, well, he paid his bail, and I'll let him go. Wherefore he sent for him the offner, which is the person to collect money, and communed with him. But after 2 years, so this went on for 2 years, he kept him. He kind of let him go, but he held him captive for 2 years. And then after 2 years, Porcius Festus, interesting name, he is basically a Roman diplomat who was in charge of cases like this, and he traveled over, came to Felix's room, and Felix, willing to show the Jews a pleasure, left Paul bound. So he's kind of playing pretty high-level politics here. He's listening to Paul, he's letting him have some freedom and some reign, but at the same time he's trying to keep the Jews happy by keeping him contained and not letting him go. So at this point, that's it for today. We got through both chapters. But at this point, he's about to be sent on down the road. He's going to stand before King Agrippa, and he appeals to Caesar, because Agrippa wants to send him back to Jerusalem. He's like, I've already been there. I appeal straight to Caesar. I'm just declaring, I'm appealing all of this riffraff that y'all are doing to me. It's now been at least 2.5 years maybe of him being tossed around. He's like, I just need to go straight to Caesar so we can handle this, at the ultimate level. It's kind of like someone in America is saying, I just need to take this to the Supreme Court and let this thing be decided. So that's what Paul ends up doing, and that's how he ultimately ends up in Rome, as Jesus has promised he's going to get there. But there's some interesting things along the way. What questions y'all got or reflections that we have on these 2 chapters?
Well, just the thought, the fact that it took 2 years to
Right.
get to the point to say, okay, it's just some strange thing.
Yeah. He's just been, like I said, playing politics here, trying to keep some people happy, and I guess trying to keep a halfway open mind to listening to what Paul has to say. I don't know.
I thought it was strange that both of them were together. You would think that they wouldn't be together. I'm talking
Sadducees and Pharisees, yeah.
It just seems strange that they would, if they're that far apart. How
I
could
guess
they be?
I guess they were both initially just that fired up about it that they were willing to overlook their differences and try to come together just to kill Paul and get him gone.
So then it became just a Sadducees thing.
Right. After Paul appealed to the Pharisees by saying, I am a Pharisee, this is what I believe, which was in line with what they believed, they seemed to back off. And then it was just a Sadducean situation moving forward after that. But yeah, they were both sides were wanting rid of him.
Yeah.
And then he kind of won over the one group, and but they're still pressuring him, and he's holding his ground. I applaud him for that. He's like, and I'm writing another book. I don't know how I'm going to write these books. I'm writing it. It's more of a teacher-based book. It's how to be a conservative teacher in a politically chaotic public school system kind of thing. And what I've done for 25 years, I've shared my faith all this time, is I know what my legal boundaries are, and you stay within them. That's how you don't get fired, but you're still able to share when it comes up and the opportunity arises. And that kind of seems like that's exactly how Paul handled this, is he was pushing the message of Jesus even though he knew it was offensive, and even though he knew it was outside the boundaries of what was acceptable by the Jewish folks. He still was preaching it, but he did everything that he did within the boundaries of not breaking any laws. And that's how he's able to get as far as he's got, by just being passed from this guy to this guy to this guy, because nobody who's pulling him into trial can find anything legally that he's done wrong. And now he's even appealed to some of the things I'm talking about aligns with what the Pharisees believe. So I don't even know why they're here, kind of thing. So he was pretty smart about how he did it. And for public school teachers, and I'm sure, even others in private corporate situations, there's rules at least, if not laws, that we have to snake around a little bit. Be wise as serpents, but harmless as doves, kind of thing. But yeah, that seems to be what Paul has been doing this whole time, is being mindful of, I got to make sure I don't step across any legal boundaries here, but I'm going to push this as far as I can, because the message needs to be presented to the world. And he's doing he went from being a murderer of Christians to being the one who wrote the most of the New Testament.
Right.
It's pretty amazing, the impact that he made, and we kind of see what he faced, and it's not too far off from some of the things that we face in this day and time. So I think there's a lot of neat things we can learn from that. All right, we'll see you guys next week, and we'll at least, let's see where we're going. Chapter 25. Yeah, we'll probably get through 25 and 26 because they're both short chapters next week. And then chapter 27 is a longer one. That's the one where he actually gets sent to Rome. It's 44 verses. And then we'll close out the study the last Sunday with chapter 28, which is a really crazy chapter. Really cool stuff that's in there. So we'll look forward to all that, and we'll see y'all next time.